I'm John from Head in the Cloud, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
This is it. The part of your week where you get to put your headphones on, relax, and listen to a bunch of geeks geek out about geeky things. They're witty.
He loves him some Katy Perry because she kissed a girl and she liked it.
They're crazy.
I like Nickelback personally, but, I'm the fuddy-duddy who likes episode 1.
And sometimes I leave you wondering, what the f***?
I'm pretty sure that here we were starting the hashtag movement, bring back Slave Ferrell.
Gonna Geek Productions presents the official GonnaGeek.com show.
Hello and welcome to episode 198 of the official GonnaGeek.com show. I am Stephen Jondrew, and with me, of course, is Stargate Pioneer.
I remembered to hit record.
We also have with us, of course, Chris Ferrell.
I'm afraid I'm going to get fired, guys.
And finally, in that fourth seat, we have nobody, because nobody wants to hang out with us anymore.
Oh. Now I'm sad.
I am too. But that's okay.
That's because we're all ex-co-hosts.
That's true. I was fired from a podcast this past week.
And you and Chris used to do a podcast together, and you don't do that anymore, so...
Well, that was just because, though, quite honestly, I just had enough of Chris Ferrell, so...
Most people have. The fact that Naki's put up with me for over 250 episodes now on a podcast, quite astounding. So kudos to her. I tip my hat to you, Naki.
No, we are here today with another episode of the official GonnaGeek.com show. If you're first time checking us out, we like to talk about all sorts of geeky happenings here on this show. And we're also part of the Gonna Geek Network, which has a variety of other amazing geeky podcasts. Now, here's what you're saying to yourself. Steven, I understand you like to talk about geeky stuff, but do you talk about space? Well, unfortunately, we don't actually have anybody on the show who is interested in space at all.
At all. Well, in order to get a person that's interested in space, go to snasa.space and you will see a list of episodes on the GonnaGeek.com website about an individual that just can't get enough of space.
So we had a fun past week because I basically was away from my computer most of it. And so I'll just go off and say to SP that I want to thank you for giving me the boot. You are the man.
Well, you got to look out for your other co-hosts on other shows, and when there comes a time where they're just too busy to pay attention to what's going on, you have to move on with the show. The show takes priority. So you just, we have a nice conversation and say it's not working out. We're having a little bit of differences and you need to go and recharge your batteries and have fun. So long, you're off the podcast, and that's what it happens.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, you should check out betterpodcasting.com, which is another member of the Gonna Geek Network. But let's go ahead and move into some news. Here we go. This week in the news, we're going to start off by telling you how Star Trek is breaking rules. That's right. You may have heard of the alleged television show called Star Trek Discovery. Apparently, it's scheduled for September, being released through CBS All Access or internationally except Canada on Netflix, or in Canada on Space Channel, and then moving to Crave TV or something like that. Allegedly, this is happening in September. It's been delayed so much that nobody will really believe it until it is out. But if this series comes out, the word on the street is that they are breaking a very, very key rule that Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, set with the original series. That's right. Apparently, Gene Roddenberry had a specific rule that there's not supposed to be any major inner conflict between crew members. This was all part of his utopian version of the future. That was the idea behind Star Trek. And this was a big key rule, was that you do not have major conflict between characters. Now, this is something that we have seen a little bit here and there, but when you look at it overall, you can see that principle applied everywhere. The number one thing that comes to my mind is in Voyager when they dealt with there being a murderer on board. Like, the way that they handled that and it came around at the end, there's still, like, there was obviously conflict because of that, but the end result ended up being that they accepted change and things like that. You could see that rule was in there, and they outcast him, but they didn't just like send him out an airlock. So it was, it has been sprinkled throughout the series, and apparently in Star Trek Discovery, they are basically throwing caution to the wind, and they will be ignoring this. And they say that the rules of Starfleet will remain the same, but while we're human or alien in various ways, none of us are perfect. So I think this is great because that is something that I have long said since everybody said, oh, Star Trek 2009 on, it's not Star Trek. I've been saying, well, let's be honest. The old format died for a reason. It doesn't work. This is the type of evolution that the franchise needs. And I think that this is actually an okay rule for them to throw away.
I think they already threw the rule away with Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Did they?
Dude, Cisco manufactured evidence to bring the Romulans into the war.
That's
point blank made up fake stuff and then tricked people in Starfleet to do it.
But that's not inter-crew conflict. That is his crew dealing with conflict of another species, which has always been there. This is not inter-crew conflict.
They spent half a season with Kira and Odo not liking each other because of his actions during the Dominion occupation.
I never
Deep
felt
Space
that.
Nine's here's the thing. Deep Space Nine's the exception to most of the Star Trek rules because instead of being on a spaceship going on a Star Trek, if you will, they're on a space station outside a wormhole, basically ripping off Babylon 5, some people might say. So Deep Space Nine, they thrived on that conflict between characters, and characters might not always agree and characters might clash, but coming through the end, they sort of win. I mean, there were dark paths in Deep Space Nine. So you throw Deep Space Nine out, I agree with you. The Roddenberry rule, yeah, they're ignoring it now.
Well, the rebooted Star Trek movie, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, they had Kirk getting spaced basically by Spock. Of course, in the end, they got together partly because Spock Prime was there as well. But I think we've been evolving to this. The one thing that I did like about Star Trek is the crew you could trust at any time. You trusted the rest of the crew to go off and do their things. And then at the end of the episode, boom, they're all working like a team and they get stuff done. That's what I liked about Star Trek. But I think you're right, Stephen, is that format doesn't work anymore, which is sad to me because that's what I liked about it.
And that's what I mean. Like when I listen to this rule, that's what I was kind of taking it as I was taking it core concrete inner Starfleet crew, like on the same ship problems. We don't really get that. Yes, we get the frustrations, like you said in Deep Space Nine. And again, I think you're right. I think overall Deep Space Nine is an exception to the rule. But I think that this might be something that we see an even bigger conflict that's longer lasting, and I'm conflicted. I like it because I like to see the evolution of where we're going with Star Trek, because I do think that it needs to evolve beyond where we left it in the late 2000s or early 2000s or whatever it was. But I also do like that element, SP. I'm with you on that. I liked that element too.
I'll miss that element because I know we're not going to get it back again because they just can't pull it off anymore and get an audience. Even if you look at the sci-fi shows right now, like Dark Matter or Killjoys, you have the crew that are at odds together. Now, Killjoys is a really smaller crew, and they're on each other's sides. But Dark Matter, any one of them could be a traitor at any one time, and it has proven that in the last couple of years. I think they're on season 3, and it has been a theme in there. So I think that you just can't get a space drama anymore without some conflict within you have to have conflict. It's like The Walking Dead. That's what fuels The Walking Dead. I just see this as reluctantly as something that's going to happen. But I like the crew. I like the Sherlock Holmes crew, right? They're all like figuring it out. And then in the end, they Scooby-Doo it and unmask the weird alien.
I mean, we can blame Battlestar Galactica for this. Let's be honest. That was when the sci-fi trend made the big shift in 2003, when you had the Galactica 2003 reboot, where it was anyone could be a Cylon. We don't know who they are. People distrust each other. People hate each other. People constantly butt heads. Look at Starbuck and Colonel Ty for the first couple seasons. There's a lot of conflict in that. And then you saw that change and everything. We all joked about Stargate Universe being Stargate Galactica. Same kind of thing going on there. Stargate moved from everyone kind of getting along to people at loggerheads.
But here's the thing, though. It didn't work for Stargate Universe, and I'm not sure it's going to work for Star Trek, because
it's not going to work for Star Trek, but that's just because Discovery, I'm very jaded on Discovery. I don't think it's going to be good, but I want to be proven wrong. Let me put it that way. I don't think it'll be good, but I want to be wrong in saying.
So you're in a space like you were before you saw the movie Wonder Woman. You're like, oh, I want it to be good, but it's DC and they're going to suck. And then they turn around and produce a great movie and you're like, hey, this is actually not bad.
I was actually more optimistic on Wonder Woman, to be honest. After seeing the trailers and things like that, the trailers for Star Trek Discovery don't really have me going, oh, this is going to be great, because all they did was show off stuff from the first episode.
I am cautiously optimistic based off of what I've seen, and some of, like, I'm conflicted about the delay, but sometimes the delay can be a good thing as far as if they did realize that the original concept didn't work. So I am of two minds on it, and I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic, because I think from the whole tone of the trailer, it does evoke a certain, not seriousness, but that they actually care about the series. And I'm hoping that that's shown, that they actually care, because that trailer doesn't feel like a bunch of stuff randomly, caught myself there, stuff slapped randomly together, right? But so that's where I'm hoping that comes through. But you are right, it's only the first episode. The other thing that's kind of intriguing to me is that we found out that they have not shown the first Enterprise, or they haven't shown, not the Enterprise, the actual ship. They have not shown
Discovery.
The Discovery. Thank you. They have not, obviously that's the name of the show, but they have not shown the Discovery. We thought we saw it, but that's not the Discovery. So that's interesting to me.
I saw this Discovery in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
All right, let's move on to the next news point. Speaking of space.
Yeah, we have another great space news. This was found on space.com by Jeff Faust, space news writer. And the European Space Agency, otherwise known as the ESA, announced way back on June 20th that its Science Program Committee has selected the Laser Interferometer Space Antenna, also known as LISA, not to be confused with the Mac LISA computers of the early 80s. So the LISA mission for development as the third large, or L3 mission from its Cosmic Vision program of science missions, and it's due to launch in 2034. That's almost 20 years out. This is how long these programs take, guys. 2034 launch. Now, it's not the first, it's the third mission in the Cosmic Vision program. It will follow the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, or JUICE, I love these acronyms, mission, which is under development for launch in 2022, and the Athena X-ray Observatory, which is planned for a 2028 launch. Now, this selection of LISA was supported by the February 2016 announcement of the first, and we talked about it here on this podcast, the first detection of gravitational waves, which were predicted by Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity a century ago. Now, the LISA proposal assumed that NASA will contribute 20% of the mission's overall cost, so it's not just the ESA, it's an international mission. But the call for proposals capped the ESA's cost for the L3 mission at 1.05 billion euros, or $1.17 billion, or what's that, Stephen? Like 1 trillion loonies? I don't know what the exchange rate is.
Pretty much the entire amount of money that Canadians have, like right. All of Canada pooled together.
So here's the cool thing. In order to detect these gravitational waves, the United States LIGO detectors had to be geographically separated by a few miles. Well, in space, there's miles and miles and miles of space. So what they're going to do is they're going to launch 3 spacecraft into a trailing orbit, Lagrange orbit from Earth, in this big, huge triangle. And that is the additional benefit of having these in space is they're able to detect the gravitational waves over larger distances, thus increasing the chance of detecting them with higher fidelity and to being able to study them. So this is all cool. Now we're going to have to wait until the 2030s to get some of the results back from this, but this is cool. We are planning on detecting gravitational waves in space.
Correction. The robot overlords in 2030 are looking forward to getting this information back.
All hail Tobor.
It's interesting that you bring that up because, future robots are going to be very interested in gravitational waves because they're going to need to know how it will affect the electromagnetism that makes their bodies actually run. So, it's important for them to know too.
By the way, you said that the name was Lisa, is that right?
That's right, LISA.
Because it reminds me of the Lisa Mattress Company, which is a competitor to Casper. And as we all know, anybody who has Casper as a sponsorship on their podcast, well, we'll leave that alone.
I'm sure there will be a Casper satellite or space probe that Casper can use in the future too.
Now
Casper,
I'm just hearing the plugs, the hundreds of plugs.
Casper, if you want to sponsor the Gonna Geek Show, don't listen to Steven. Come sponsor us. Give us money to podcast. We'll do it. Don't listen to that negative person over there. We'll do it.
Now, you're just going to start a whole generation of space probes sponsored by stamps.com, audible.com, Casper.com. It's just going to be a rush of sponsorships. Of
No,
space
you know
probes.
what? That's actually a really good point because we are actually seeing the privatization of so much space stuff. I'm surprised that's not happening. That's, I know you're making that in joke, but that should actually be happening.
You guys did see KFC's launching a bucket of chicken into space, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't.
I mean, yeah,
Yep.
KFC's launching a bucket of chicken into space to send it the other side of the galaxy.
And
that's awesome.
Let's not forget the whole Red Bull stunt either.
That was not space.
It was in space.
It was almost space. It was like
It's
subspace.
62 miles up. That's space.
That's space.
It was kind of space.
Hey, it doesn't matter if you're
I'm-
orbiting. You just have to breach that altitude barrier.
Steven, I'm going to defer to our resident NASA director here when it comes to what is space and isn't space. I'm not going to listen to some guy that got fired off his own podcast.
That's true, actually. So let's defer to SP. SP,
That's right.
you are always right. Always.
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 Can you tell my wife that, please?
All right, next news point here. We're going to talk a little bit about how something's kind of actually exciting now that something was almost in ruins.
There's scandal in the world of Star Wars right now. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but the internet is absolutely melting down about the Han Solo prequel movie. And you might be asking, well, why is that? Well, last week, Kathleen Kennedy, the person who's heading up Lucasfilm, fired Phil Lord and Chris Miller from directing the Han Solo standalone. Why it's significant? Because they were like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way done filming the movie. Now, if you're not familiar with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, their background is with some more comedic kind of things. They did the Lego movie, and then they also did 21 and 22 Jump Street. They've done a few other things. They helped write part of the script for The Flash, actually. Well, they got canned, and the real question is, well, why? And some of the news started leaking out about why that was. And part of what was happening there, when you dig into the sources The Hollywood Reporter did, is that these guys like to do a more improvisational kind of movie. They like to throw out lines, have people ad-lib a lot, and that doesn't really fit with what Kathleen Kennedy and the Disney folks were wanting for Star Wars. They wanted people to stick a little more to the script. One instance they brought up is that they were doing a bunch of shots inside the Millennium Falcon cockpit. They didn't actually start shooting until 1 p.m. for some reason, only using 2 or 3 different setups versus the 12 to 15 that were expected in there, meaning not a ton of room to edit anything that goes wrong. This was just one of the signs of trouble they were having, supposedly. Hollywood Reporter reports that Lawrence Kasdan was actually called in from his home in Los Angeles to come report in to Kathleen Kennedy to talk about what was going on with the film. Why that's important? Lawrence Kasdan's written a bunch of the Star Wars movies. He wrote a good chunk of The Force Awakens. He wrote a good chunk of Empire Strikes Back. When you think of Star Wars, you think of Lawrence Kasdan. He and his son wrote a good deal of the script for the Han Solo prequel movie, and he had a little bit of heartburn over the fact that his script was only loosely being followed. What it comes down to, it seems like, is that Lord and Miller seem to have an understanding of they would be given a bit more free reign to make more of a comedy set in the Star Wars universe, where it seems like Lucasfilm was looking for a Star Wars movie that had elements of comedy in it. So the two sides didn't really mesh. They got fired. It's kind of a bummer situation. But what's not a bummer situation... Oh, you're air quoting me, Steven.
Creative differences was the term. In fact, there was a whole bunch of BS that was out there about that, because they go, I think it was Kathleen Kennedy says, we're not really fans of the term creative differences, but in this case, it actually applied. And it's just like, no, you can't go and try to spin a terrible term just because you're now using it. No, you are as bad as every other person who has used that term.
So what it came down to at this one, like I said, is the two styles weren't meshing. And I applaud the fact, remember early on we talked about this. We said, this is really cool. The Lucasfilm's trying something different. They're taking some directors with a background that doesn't really fit what you'd expect in the Star Wars galaxy and Star Wars universe, and try to mesh that in to a movie like this. Well, it didn't quite work. And it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. If they don't fire him and the movie flops, it's like, well, what the hell were you thinking? If they want to try and save the movie, they've got to fire him to bring someone in to help and save it. They're stuck. That's the problem you ran into there. I don't know what the right decision was.
This is actually mind-blowing to me when you think about Rogue One. And why this is mind-blowing to me is because this shows me that these secondary Star Wars movies are not being paid attention to by Lucasfilm. They are not putting the proper hands on.
I disagree.
No, I think that this is absolutely confirmation, because Rogue One had the same problem virtually, where they got done most of the film and realized it was not what they wanted, and they had to come in and flip it around and ask for reshoots and cuts and things like that. This is the same idea. Is they're 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way through the film, and we're seeing a change. That is way too late.
Hold on a sec, though. We're acting like reshoots are something new with the new generation of Star Wars movies. Remember, they reshot episode 7.
Yeah, okay, reshoots are one thing, guys. Hold on a second.
Right.
With any major production nowadays, you give dailies to the front production office. Right. Now, this is where I think Steven's right. They're not paying attention to the dailies, because if they were paying attention to the dailies, they would have made the corrections months ago, really early into the shooting, rather than let them get this far and have to step in.
And back to the Rogue One thing, it wasn't just, maybe I used the wrong term. I know it was reshoots, but it was admitted that the Rogue One had to change the tone drastically from what they were originally submitting, because it was just not what Disney wanted. And that's where I think that the two of these, we got Rogue One, we've got Han Solo movie. Those are your two first movies outside of the main Star Wars line, and they're both having to get basically flipped on their head towards the end of shooting. It's crazy to me. I think that they are clearly not paying attention early on with these films.
Well, they're paying attention. They just wouldn't let it go too far down the path, I think, is part of what happened there. And so, yes, it's troubled. They never should have made a Han Solo prequel movie in my own mind. I mean, I'm looking forward to the fact that Donald Glover is going to be Lando Calrissian and things like that, but Han Solo prequel's not really what fans were clamoring for, because how do you replace Harrison Ford, who's iconic in the role? Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you do it. And I think there's other reports that came out there. I don't think it was the Hollywood Reporter that had this one, but supposedly a few months back, Disney brought in an acting coach for Alden Ehrenreich because they weren't quite happy with his performance as Han Solo. Another sign that maybe this isn't quite what we were expecting. Now, here's how they're going to save it, or at least try to save it. When you've got a flick that's in troubled waters, you need to try and save it. What do? You bring in one of the big guns. Lucasfilm is bringing in Academy Award-winning director Ron Howard to come in and clean up the Han Solo Star Wars movie. Now, I like Ron Howard. He's a good director. He's experienced. You think he's got all the credentials you need to come and clean that up? I'm cautiously optimistic to see what he can turn this into, because even Ron Howard's made some good movies, and even his bad movies are still good in comparison to most of the other crap you get out there right now. And I do also have to give him credit. Before he actually signed on board to do the Han Solo movie, he did reach out to Miller and Lord via email and said that they were very supportive, very elegant over his taking up the role of director for Star Wars, the Han Solo standalone movie.
Here's where it gets a little interesting in film history for those of you that don't know. So Ron Howard and Harrison Ford were in a little film prior to Star Wars called American Graffiti. Who was the director of American Graffiti? George Lucas. So George Lucas went on to do Star Wars after that. He actually took Harrison Ford as a prop manager or janitor or something like that and used it to test characters to the point where he's like, oh, I'm going to use Harrison Ford in the film. Ron Howard was not in the film. So basically what I'm trying to say is Ron Howard was in the pre-Star Wars film for George Lucas and Harrison Ford. So he's been there the whole time.
Right. So there's really interesting interview they have with Ron Howard at Cannes right now, and Empire Online had. I pulled a couple quotes out. Like SP said, Ron Howard was in American Graffiti. He talked about in a Q&A there his conversation with George Lucas about his next future plans. He said, I've been around the Star Wars universe from the beginning. When I was being directed by George Lucas on American Graffiti in 1972, we were standing out in front of Mel's Drive-In in San Francisco where we were shooting. And I said, do you know what your next film will be? And he said, yeah. I want to do a science fiction movie, but a really fun one like Flash Gordon with the effects of Stanley Kubrick's 2001. I thought, that sounds like a crazy idea. Continuing on, he said he was still curious about what might happen. He said he queued up with his wife for 2 hours in 1977 and went in to go see the original film when it came out, and now he's going to be contributing to the wider legacy. He said, quote, so many people involved with the Star Wars franchise are friends, so it's gratifying to be able to lend my voice to the universe, coming in when it's already been in production and there's a great amount of work done. So he's saying all the right things. He's a talented filmmaker. I'm cautiously optimistic to see what he can do with this, but like I said earlier, it's a movie that didn't need to be made. And I think it's going to be tough in that regard.
You know, one of the other things that is interesting to me is how different these three directors, we'll say three directors are, because when you look at it, right, we got 22 Jump Street, and then you've got Ron Howard, who, you know, things that kind of go into those into that sort of comedic line is still very serious. Like what comes to mind is Ed TV, right? Ed TV was something where it takes a big turn partway through where he just starts to hate the whole reality thing, right? Like, you know, and there's this whole conflict within his family. And we look, and I think the most sort of comedic property he has in recent was that one with Kevin James, and who was the other one? What was it called? Was it The Dilemma, I think. Wasn't that a comedy?
For Ron Howard?
I think Ron Howard did. Yeah, I think he did.
Well, there is a handy thing called the Internet Movie Database that I'm pulling up as we speak.
He did. It was called The Dilemma. It was Vince Vaughn, Kevin James, and it was where a man discovered his best friend's wife was having an affair. But it was still like there was obviously a serious element to it, right? And that is what it is. It's actually on IMDb listed as a comedy drama, and it's so opposite of these other guys.
Well, okay, so you have that where you have a dichotomy in the directors of the film, the production staff, but let's take a step back. And there have been some successes lately of films that have had to go in for reshoots and come out on the other side as a good movie. The Wonder Woman is a prime example of that. Nobody thought that was, I definitely think that was savable, and it was indeed safe. So there are examples of that. Sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. So there's that. Now, I want to actually take this even to a broader perspective. So the comedic sort of look at a film in a universe works well when you have the carte blanche to do whatever you want to do. Jon Favreau is a great example of that with Iron Man. There was no Marvel or Disney overlords, so he was able to shape the whole universe however he wanted to because he was up front and early in that, and he created, with Robert Downey Jr., the current Marvel cinematic universe. So you've got that. I question whether or not that is even possible to do with an established universe. Look at the Ant-Man movie and the director's issues there. Look at all the other movies out there that have had directors that have been fired basically for creative differences reasons, is because they're walking into an established universe. They want to put their own spin on it, but the production company above them wants it to fit in the same genre because they want to make the money from the genre.
But did you say Ant-Man?
I did see Ant-Man, and I did say Ant-Man.
Yeah, because I think I kind of look at Ant-Man as the counter to what you're saying, because the Marvel Universe was very established, and we had all of those problems.
Edgar Wright was fired.
Yeah, and we had all of these problems, but Ant-Man is a hilarious film compared to all of the other Marvel properties at the time.
Yeah, but Edgar Wright was taking it in a direction that Marvel and Disney didn't want him to take. So yeah, it was comedic, but it was an example of a director that wasn't going the direction that they wanted to in an established universe.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't care enough to argue the point, but I just think that this is honestly bizarre because of how different they are. And really, especially when you look at Ron Howard's recent work, so many of them, I've been looking just at the IMDb here, so many of them are like documentaries lately. So it's odd. Maybe you know what it is? Han Solo is a documentary. It actually happened.
Maybe. What's the closest he's got to this? Is it actually Apollo 13 for space/sci-fi?
That would probably be his biggest space movie he's done, but let's see. I'm looking through his list. He did the Inferno movies, so basically all the Dan Bryan books. Let's see. Made in America, I don't remember.
I mean, as far as sci-fi,
Angels and Demons.
Apollo 13 is it. Maybe the Da Vinci Code, but that wasn't sci-fi or CGI heavy.
But you know, I don't think he needs to be big on the sci-fi credit for this. I think he needs to be able to do a character piece, because I think that that's the more important thing, is getting the character elements of Han and Chewie and Lando and how they all meet and how the friendships form and things like that. Getting that to work, I think, is more important. I don't think we're going to be getting we'll probably have some kind of space battles, but it's not going to be centered around a giant space battle where it's...
Yeah, if you're talking about space documentary, sorry to cut you off there, Chris. I just saw something in the IMDb that warrants discussion. If you're talking about a space documentary, you have the Nat Geo Mars documentary thing that came out last year, and not Star Wars quality, not anywhere close.
Did he do that?
Yes, he was the executive producer for Mars.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, but that's different than directing. Well, a lot of people can be executive producers, but it'll be interesting to see if they can make it flow at all. That's the biggest concern I have at this point, given how different their two tastes are. Like, I think you make an excellent point about him coming in to work the relationships, but it could feel very disjointed. I'm hoping not, but it could.
That's why you pay him the big bucks to try and piece things together, because they were supposed to wrap filming in July. I don't think I mentioned this. They extended it out until September now. So
that's crazy.
There's more time to film, more time to patch things together, but they have a hard out in September because Donald Glover and one of the other cast members, whose name's escaping me, have TV commitments starting in September. So they have to be done filming end of July.
Crazy.
Now, this could be the biggest Star Wars success since Star Wars itself, because take a look at the mess that film was, that Lucas actually made in post later. And then Empire Strikes Back also was set to be a wreck if Lucas wasn't put in check by his ex-wife and best friend, right?
Yeah. People are being very negative on this one. I can understand, because it's so different than the norm. But here's the thing to keep in mind. Lucasfilm was bought for a boatload of money by Disney. They're going to do whatever it takes to get this right, because you don't want to screw up this investment. Look what they've done with the Marvel movies. Everyone's like, oh, Disney's going to screw that up. No, they got it right. They're going to do whatever it takes, be it time, money, whatever, to get this right. I'm not going to be shocked if this movie ends up getting delayed, though. That would not surprise me.
I could see that. But let's move on to our extra section here, where we've got a couple other quick picks for you here in the news realm. And it's the number one. Google is claiming that they are not going to snoop your email to target ads anymore. That's right. They say that they are going to stop scanning emails in your Gmail account to help sell targeted advertising. Now, they're going to make this change later in the year, and this is to do with their whole bringing the Gmail in line with the G Suite products geared towards business users. And the quote is, "This decision brings Gmail ads in line with how we personalize ads for other Google products." This was from Diane Green, who is the senior vice president of Google Cloud. You know they're going to keep snooping you in other ways.
Well, yeah, I have an Android phone with a GPS. I go somewhere to eat, and when I get home, there's a Google Map notification. Were you just here? Do you want to put it on your timeline? It's just, you have to accept a level of intrusion when you use Google services. And if it's not right for you, then you use something else. So, I mean, hell, how long have we had Gmail for? Since 2003, 2004?
I don't care.
People are used to it.
Yeah. The other thing that we've got here, I'm going to let actually Chris talk about this one here because it's all about the Echo.
That's good because Chris is barely prepared to talk about this one. But hey, if you guys remember, I like to talk about home automation and Amazon voice services devices such as the Echo and the Echo Dot. Well, Stephen found a new feature coming to it. It was reported in Business Insider. Something that I've actually asked for is the ability to use an Echo as an intercom. Evidently, if you go into the Amazon Voice Services application, I almost did it. You can go into the settings, and there you can enable the drop-in feature for their new messaging service within your household group. Basically, this is going to allow users of other Echo devices to start chatting with you or viewing the video stream from your device without you having to answer their call. So the use case here in my house would be if I had an Echo upstairs and it was dinner time, I could use that feature to be like, hey, it's dinner time, and have that message pushed to those other devices in the house. It's cool, but a little clunkier than I would like. I'd love to just be able to tell her like, hey, intercom mode, put this to all my devices and be done with it.
I think that this is a solid idea and something well overdue. I totally think that this is well beyond time, and it is, especially with those dots. Before the dots, I would be like, who cares? But with the dots, so cheap, so inexpensive, so small. What a brilliant idea by Amazon to finally do this.
I'm waiting for Google to do it with their devices now.
Are you going to set this up, SP?
I will. Matter of fact, I was just they had a sale going on Amazon right now for the taller cylindrical device in both black and white, and it's at the price point that I think I'm going to grab one.
You know, I saw that sale, and unfortunately, it's still really expensive to get up to Canada. But I am really happy to see, even if we don't have it in Canada yet, I'm really happy to see Amazon running another one of these sales right now, because I think that this is, this feature is another great indication of a use that everyday people can actually adopt these. Because before, when you're just like occasionally using it to ask a question, things like that, there's some people who are going to be like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't know that I really care too much about that. Am I going to do that? This is super helpful for like what, $39 right now on sale, or last week on sale. They're going to run that again. It's awesome. Love it.
Yeah, the dots go on sale on a regular basis. Today, though, as we record, this is June 26th. I believe it's the same day that the Echo Show drops. They do have the OG Echo, the tall cylindrical one like SP had talked about. They knocked $50 off. It's the cheapest it's been for a brand new Echo since they launched. You could get refurbs at that price, but that's a killer price. If you were in the market, you were thinking about it as we record this live, you've got like 3 hours to decide, 2.5 hours to decide if you want to buy it.
And if you're watching this after the fact, you missed it. And last up in our extra, apparently SP has personally discovered a planet.
Yeah. So the great thing about this is we've been hearing all about this Planet 10 ever since we talked about it a few months ago, Planet 10. Well, guess what? Not only do we have Pluto, not only do we have Planet 10, but scientists are now speculating there is yet another planet that's even bigger lurking out there in the far reaches of the solar system. So I'm going to keep my eyes on this so-called Planet 11, or 10 if you don't count Pluto, and which I do. So I'm going to keep my eyes on this, and let's see exactly what it is. So we'll see if more information arises in the future.
I read an article today that Anonymous is claiming that NASA is very close to releasing information saying that there is indeed life, which, as we all know, Anonymous has a 100% success rate. So
no, what you have to do to announce life is you have to send humans to Mars so that they can get in some sort of trouble on Mars, and then have to go find some way to get the natural elements to survive, to make oxygen. And all of a sudden in doing that, they find life. And then all of a sudden the coffers open up to send more humans to Mars. That's how it goes, Stephen. You don't just announce it here.
Where I was going with that was that obviously this is tied to Planet 11, right?
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I think we just have to wait for the Galactic Federation to colonize Earth when the wanted criminal Rick Sanchez is captured and thrown in Federation jail.
Guys,
Wubba lubba dub dub, guys.
It's the new headquarters of the Green Lanterns. I'm trying not to give it away, but you guys are just pressing and guessing way too wildly. So that's what it is.
That's
Green
okay.
Lanterns.
I believe it. And as Dane in the chat says, let's just ask Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. Get out of my brain, SP. Get out of my brain.
I gotta rewatch that movie. I really didn't like it the first time I watched it.
You don't
I really didn't like it at all.
It's
I
a great movie.
I
It's
tried.
great.
I
Rewatch it.
couldn't. It's bad.
No,
That's
watch it
by the
again.
way,
You'll
we're
love
talking about Team America for you not familiar with that reference. It is
F
Team
yeah.
America.
F yeah, Team America.
America, expletive deleted, yeah.
But let's go ahead and move on. Here we go. Oh, the world exploded for some weird reason today. It seemed like every Facebook page that I paid attention to, every retail center was sharing the link that Nintendo has announced the SNES Classic, the Super Nintendo Classic. It is coming in September, and if you're not familiar, there was last year a product called the NES Classic, the Nintendo Classic. So they went and they made a little teeny little Nintendo, and they put some games on it, and they sold some really stupidly short controllers, and they allegedly sold because most people couldn't end up buying it. Now, I was lucky enough to get one myself, and so a lot of people speculated, well, are they going to do the Super Nintendo? And then all of a sudden, Nintendo said, no, we've never actually caught up with the stock. People have been trying months and months and months of getting the Nintendo Entertainment System Classic, and they have not been able to keep up with the demand. So we're going to go ahead and just shut it all down. And so people thought, well, okay, so if they're not doing that, maybe that means that they're not going to do the SNES Classic. And they did announce that today, and it's going to come with 21 different games. So we wanted to take some time to talk about this because there's a whole bunch of questions that come with this news. A whole bunch of questions. And I'll turn it over to Chris first here because he's raising his hand for you audio listeners.
2 controllers also, that's one of the key points, because with the NES Classic, if you wanted to play some of those multiplayer games, you had to try and scrounge a second first-party Nintendo controller, which was near impossible, or pick up a third-party one. So part of what happens paying more for the console for the SNES Classic is you get 2 controllers, which is a big point.
Yeah, so I agree that is a big point. Now, the questions that I have right now is, how is there going to be more demand for this or less? Because on one hand, people are still wishing that they had the Nintendo, but on the flip side, they might be sitting there really with a bad taste in their mouth.
Well, it's the typical Nintendo console launch, and if you go and look, starting with about the Wii, and I guess even sometimes you saw with the N64, when Nintendo consoles first launched, they're hard as hell to find. You can't even find a Nintendo Switch on shelves in most cases anymore. So it's not unheard of, and there is conspiracy theories that many fans have, including myself at times, that Nintendo likes this artificial scarcity because it gets headlines going, look, people are in line for my Nintendo Switch. People are in line trying to find this NES Classic. It's a pain. And as much as they're like, oh yeah, we're aware of what the demand's going to be, yeah, when Nintendo's aware of demand, that means they might release an extra 10% compared to what the original stuff was. You go and look at this. You can't find Switches. You can't find amiibos of Zelda characters. You can't find a bunch of stuff because Nintendo doesn't put massive numbers out there of them right now. And I don't get it. I want an SNES Classic, but I look forward to never being able to find one.
The difference is they usually eventually catch up with these things. With the Switch will catch up. The Wii caught up. Eventually it happens. Once they've gone and they've really just made that hot market and then it starts to plateau, they catch up. But they never did that with the NES Classic.
Yeah, that's the problem is, are they going to do another short run like they did NES Classic where it's on sale for 4 months and then it's basically done? That's what I'm afraid of, because you go and look at the SNES Classic, and I'm sure we'll talk about the games. There's not a bad game being bundled in this. There's a lot of fans, myself included, like, oh, hell yeah, I want this. These games are great.
Yeah, when the NES Classic came out, I actually mixed them up and thought that it was that Star Fox was on the NES till my brother reminded me, and that was one of the most excited things that I was. And then I was reminded of that, and so I'm super excited for this.
Did you see the cool thing on Star Fox? We're going to talk games a second, guys. Star Fox 2 never came out on the SNES. We made through development, I guess, was like 90% of the way done. The first way you'll be able to legitimately play Star Fox 2 is on the SNES Classic. And Nintendo said it'll be on there, but you can't play it until you beat the first level of Star Fox.
Sweet.
It's locked behind beating the first level of Star Fox, which to me, I'm like, okay, that's great. I love the Star Fox games. I'm doing it anyways. But I want to play the hell out of Star Fox 2 because I loved Star Fox on there. I loved Star Fox 64. I replayed it on the DS. It is a great, great game. I'll just never be able to find it because I know how this works with Nintendo products. Unless you can pre-order, which you couldn't do with the NES Classic, it's near impossible to find.
You can still get the NES Classic, guys. It is
I'm
for
not paying
sale.
$200.
It is $200, but if you want it, you can still get it. It is still available. I looked on eBay and I looked at Amazon. You can still get a new system for $200.
I'm not rewarding scalpers.
No, me neither. And I know, SP, that you actually, and I want to get your take on this because I know you're not as excited about this. And we even talked about it on here before that the NES Classic you're familiar with some of them, but it was a little bit past your early gaming experience, right?
That's right. I'm a little bit too old for the NES or the.
I was being polite, okay? I
Super
didn't want to say you were
that's
too
good.
old.
Yeah, we'll be honest here. I was too old to experience this stuff. I was already in college or beyond when they were coming out. And basically, I was looking at this from the business case because I'm not excited about the ability to play the games. So I'm like, okay, what about the business case here? So with the NES Classic, it was $60, so low price. They probably couldn't it wasn't worth their profitability to get these out there. And I'm not sure if they had the ability to put those games out legally in mass quantity. So that's probably all combined into the fact that they needed to shut that down because it wasn't going to be profitable for them. So then you move on to the Super NES Classic. Now, I didn't see anything about a price point with these. Have you guys seen anything with a price point?
I thought I read
$80.
$79.
Yeah, $79.99 is what I'd read for it.
So basically, with the success of the NES Classic, they were able to move on to the Super NES Classic and add a little bit more dollars and then make the agreements with whoever owns the rights to the games that, hey, look, we're going to put these out. They're going to be out there again. You're going to get notoriety again, and it might be worth a lower commission for you. So that's the only thing I can think of, is that they made this a little bit more profitable so they can move ahead. This is all assuming they're going to make enough to meet demand, though.
The vast majority of the games in the 21 there are direct Nintendo first-party games. I think there's a few third-party ones because I see like Final Fantasy is in there, for instance, and Contra. I know those weren't made directly by Nintendo, and same with Mega Man X, but I would say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the games that are on there, it doesn't cost Nintendo any licensing because like, these are our games, let's put them out there.
Yeah, and I gotta say, okay, let's just run through the list here, Chris. Let's go ahead and alternate because you and I are both equally excited. So the first one is Contra 3, The Alien Wars.
Next up, Donkey Kong Country.
Earthbound.
Final Fantasy 3.
F-Zero.
Kirby Superstar.
Kirby's Dream Course.
One of my favorite games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Mega Man X.
Secret of Mana.
Star Fox.
Star Fox 2.
Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting.
Super Castlevania 4.
Super Ghouls and Ghosts.
Super Mario Kart.
I'm going to take the next two because one of them I'm really excited about. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. Yes. And my favorite on the list, Super Mario World.
Mario RPG is a big deal because that game is tough to still find at times. And when you find it, it's like $60 for the cartridge on that. Because if you recall correctly, that's Square Enix basically made an RPG with Mario characters. Mm-hmm. It's awesome. So next up, another game that's really good, which is going to be a lot of nostalgia for because a new game is coming, Super Metroid.
Super Punch-Out.
And Yoshi's Island.
So a really good list. If you were into the SNES, it is a really solid list. There are multiple titles that I know from this list that like every Saturday when my parents were like, okay guys, you have some money, go down to the movie store and rent yourself some games. By the way, you used to do that. You used to physically go to somewhere. We would
Sounds
rent.
exhausting.
We would spend probably more money renting the damn game than buying it. But there's really many titles on this list, and it's oh man, I don't even want to think about how much money we spent renting Star Fox.
Oh man, I played the heck out of that game. My dad and I played a lot of these games when I was a kid. That's part of what Nintendo gets here with this and the NES Classic was nostalgia, because I want one for me and I also want one for my dad because these are games that he played with me as a kid.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I really wanted to come around with this. One of the reasons I am very excited and very crushed about the NES Classic and the potential of missing this is one of the coolest things that I have experienced in the last year with my children is seeing my 4-year-old playing the NES Classic and asking me to play the games with him. And he loves them. They're great. And the thing is, even the more adult games on there still doesn't matter because it's like 80s, 70s graphics, right? So I am very crushed at the potential that I'm not going to get one of these. And I actually today said to my wife, I'm like, well, you can count on me spending the night somewhere waiting for this release in September because I probably will. I wasn't bought into it, and I don't know that I'd be bought into it if I didn't own an NES Classic, but the fact that I have had an NES Classic, I have really enjoyed the fact that the graphics look better than any emulator that I've seen. The physical unit looks really cool, and the actual controllers that came for it are really good. They're better than the controller that came with it is hands down better than any of the third-party ones that I've ever seen. And I even ran through a series of third-party controllers to get myself a second controller. And the Nintendo one that they released is far better. So I'm glad that they're doing 2 controllers on this. And that to me was the make or break, was the fact that it actually felt like the NES. And so I'm hoping that the SNES goes the same way. And I think I paid $79 Canadian for the NES Classic. I'm going to guess in Canada, it'll probably be like $119 or so for the SNES. I'm okay with it.
I'm looking at the list of games for the NES Classic, and Final Fantasy's on there. And Final Fantasy 3 is on the Super NES Classic. I wonder, I think I'm going to have to go to Cody and Jonathan over at Game Life Balance US, which is another podcast on the GonnaGeek.com network, to see where's the best place to play Final Fantasy 2 outside of these classic consoles.
I think it's available on iOS and Android, actually.
Is it?
I have played it on iOS, but that's not what I was wondering. I was wondering what is the best place to play Final Fantasy 2.
Well, I'm really excited that they've learned and they're putting in the extra controller on this. And that was a stupid move. I can only imagine it came down to a manufacturing problem because I never, ever in Canada saw a single controller available at any retail center. I was on 100 lists and I never saw one actually for sale in Canada that was the authentic one. So I'm glad that they are including 2 on the SNES Classic because I think the price point on a controller was like $12.99 Canadian, I think, for the authentic one was the listed price. So just they should have just increased the price to begin with and included 2.
Look in the chat room, we see the Android port's pretty smooth for Final Fantasy 2.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing. We briefly touched on it. A lot of people have balked at the fact of NES Classic and SNES Classic because they're like, you could just go and you could just make yourself a Raspberry Pi and it does the same thing. Well, number one, it's illegal. So if you want to do that, you can, but it is illegal, 100% illegal. Number 2, I have a Wii that's hooked up that I hooked back up for my kids, and I went and I played the Wii versions of Super Mario, and they look like garbage compared to the NES Classic. They did something with the NES Classic to make it look better on a modern television. And I have the hired cable for the Wii, so it's not that. It's just you can tell that they've gone and they've done some form of enhancement on the NES Classic. I can't describe it, but it is much more comfortable on the eyes, and it feels like something that is meant to be used on something old meant to be used on a modern TV. So I'm assuming they're going to do the same thing with the SNES Classic. And I've had a chance to play with some people's Pis over the years who have done the emulators because people have been doing this for like 15, 20 years. It seems like, I don't know, at least 10. But it just didn't seem the same to me. Not that you guys would know because you don't have an NES Classic, so.
You don't have
Never
a Nintendo Switch, so ha.
That's true, I don't. Chris, any final thoughts on this? Because I know you're super excited.
Like I said, if I can actually get one, I'll love it, but I'm not holding my breath because nobody's accepting pre-orders at this point in time. And like I said, the NES Classic, nobody did pre-orders for. So unless there's pre-orders, it's going to be tough going, guys.
Yeah. SP, I know you're not super excited about the games, but what's your thoughts?
Well, again, going back to the business case, if I don't know what the demand was for the NES Classic beyond what they put out. They might have done some studies and figured if we make a couple of 100 more, a couple of thousand more, yeah, we'll sell them, but then we're stuck with over inventory. And this is just supposed to be something that's easy, cheap, and gives us a little bit of profit and a lot of PR. And if they've taken any lessons learned from the Classic, hopefully they will have made enough to satiate most people's desire for the Super NES Classic, made a little bit more, maybe didn't use the original components or whatever they were doing for the NES Classic, and then be able to get out of this PR nightmare for people like you guys. Like I could care less, but I know you guys care a lot. So from a business case, I hope they make enough to satiate desire. If you go back to the Atari Classic consoles that they sold, interest waned on those really quickly. And I think Nintendo was looking at that saying, yeah, this is going to be a neat thing. But after that, nobody's going to want them anymore because nobody's going to want to play these games on new TVs. So I can't speak for them, but that's what I'm thinking of from an unemotional business case standpoint of why they decided to go the way that they did. And so we'll see what changes with the Super NES, and we'll know by Christmas time this year. So 6 months from now, we'll know whether they made the right decisions or not.
Do you want to know what my theory is? My theory is the nostalgia thing is obviously going on here, and what they're working through is I think they're going to do in 2018, they're going to end up doing a Nintendo 64, and then they might do a GameCube, but I'm thinking when they get to GameCube, it's so relatively modern. It's not modern, but I feel like the nostalgia factor won't be as strong that then at that point they might do a super console that has them all.
I would just settle for a virtual console on my Switch that played a lot of these games, which they still have not put out.
Which they
that
really
is what I want.
Yeah, and they should do that and offer a way to hook up a controller or something that, because again, I as someone who has an NES Classic, I really feel that the controller is such a big part of that experience.
The only NES controller that I've ever held was a USB controller that was owned by somebody else. So I didn't get the really good desire or experience in the game, and there was some sort of lag or whatever. It's because I kept mashing the controls and it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do until a certain point. So I don't know how much of that was the original console and how much of that was the emulator. So it is a distinct feel, though. It is something that you hold in both hands, but you mash buttons that are really small, like a early iPhone.
Mm-hmm. And everybody though who is wanting this has likely played it before, so it just brings back that sense. You put the controller in your hands, and the nostalgia rush comes back. It's naturally there. It's like, oh, I remember. So, like I said, I think they'll end up doing a 64 in 2018, and then past that, I won't be surprised if they end up doing some super console that does them all.
I've got a GameCube in this house right now, so I mean, there's no nostalgia factor for me there.
I've got N64 and up in this house on Nintendo consoles, except for a Wii U because I never bought one.
Yeah, let's pretend that doesn't exist. But
most people did.
That is going to take us towards the end of the show. Before we wrap up, we'll go around the table and promote and plug and do whatever we'd like to do before we close. SP?
Yeah, go ahead and take a look tomorrow at Better Podcasting. It's a show that I used to do with Steven, and we have an exciting announcements tomorrow, which should be out by the time this show is published. So go take a look at it and find out what the great announcement is.
So sad. Chris, you got anything that you want to plug or promote?
So real quick, we're probably going to touch on it, but just in case we forget, we're not going to be here next week, guys. No live show, but it's okay. It's okay. I want to promote it now. We do have a guest coming to join us for our next live show on July 10th. Justin Robert Young from the Diamond Club. You might know him from the Jury podcast, Night Attack, things like that. He will be joining us for the episode 199 of the Gonna Geek Show. He'll be talking about his Action News Kickstarter, which launches in like 4 days.
So come back then, and then the week after that, it'll be episode 200 of the Gonna Geek Show. And that was a nice...
I said hi.
Unfortunately, SP won't be on that show. But Chris, anything else you want to plug? Because you also kind of tied it in to telling people that we were going to be away. So I'll let you take another plug.
I get 2 plugs?
Sure, why not?
Sweet. All right. So in all seriousness, we've had a lot of new additions to the network lately. And I know we've touched on it before. Lots of new quality content coming in. Head on over to GonnaGeekNetwork.com. Check out some of the new shows we've got in there. Some really fun, entertaining stuff. I can't believe some of the cool shows we had coming to join us now. And I cannot keep caught up on my podcast now because there's so much stuff I listen to. So it's a terrible but wonderful problem at the same time to have.
Awesome. And I want to just go ahead and actually give a thanks to Chris, my former co-host, Stargate Pioneer, as well as Suncast. This weekend, I was very busy, and you might be able to figure it out when you hear the sign-off, but I was very busy, and the 3 of them kept the ball moving this past weekend while I was very busy. So I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. So thank you so much for continuing the 200 movement.
Is that like a bowel movement?
You need more fiber. It feels better then.
On that note, this has been episode 198 of the official GonnaGeek.com show. I'm Stephen Jondrew saying, congrats, David.
And I'm Stargate Pioneer saying, congrats, David.
And I'm Chris Ferrell saying, congrats, David.
Bye. GonnaGeek.com.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the GonnaGeek.com show. If you enjoyed it, please give us a 5-star review in iTunes or a thumbs up on YouTube. We encourage you to send your feedback by email to show@GonnaGeek.com. You can find our entire archive at GonnaGeek.com/show. And while you're there, why not check out all of the other geeky content on the Gonna Geek Network? Want to chime into our live chat? Join us Mondays at 8:45 p.m. Eastern at www.geeks.live. The music heard on this show is by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew of Gonna Geek Productions. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.